bring this to attention. The other thing is to pick up on what my colleague from the ILO just said about the number of plans that exist. In the OECS, we have a strategic plan. There are plans at CARICOM, plans in ACS, and so on. When we talk about convergence, this is what this is all about. Convergence has to break down into very practical amalgamation of priorities, creating strategic alliances, and getting things to work together. A very simple device we've used at the OECS is to convene a meeting of all the multilateral agencies, the development partners. We met just last week in Barbados. A simple forum where we share information twice a year, keep each other abreast of what is happening. We've been signing MOUs with the World Bank, for example. We've said to the World Bank, enough of coming in and doing studies. Let us work together on a joint research program using joint expertise, joint missions, so that we can truly converge our efforts rather than duplicate things. So to the point of education. How does this work? Education has to be related to society. That's a truism, but it is a truism that is often ignored. What are the key elements of Caribbean sustainability? I think there are three things really, and I put a fourth question mark because I'm sure there's always some agenda that can be added to it. But essentially, Caribbean sustainability should be about building regenerative societies. I think it was Peter Senge who said that the challenge in today's world is not just growth or growth with equity, but really building societies that have a regenerative capacity. Societies that can regenerate are societies that can sustain themselves. Sustainable economies are critical because the basis of the strength of any society is a strong economy. And participatory democracy, for all of the reasons that have been enunciated here today, the question of governance is of vital importance. Each of these breaks down into some very practical things. When we talk about sustainable economies, we're talking about renewable energy because energy is a major factor in our economies. It's a major cost. It's a huge part of our GDP cost. Climate resilience, again, the discussions have pointed to the necessity of that. Productive jobs. It's not just about jobs in terms of make work, short-term employment programs, as vital as that may be in terms of cash transfers to the poor. These job initiatives have in the long run to be sustainable. They have to be productive. And it's about equitable growth. And I noted, from the previous, one of the previous presentation by the advisor to the UN, that exclusion really breeds desperation. And while we may not be at the stage that Nigeria or the other countries threatened by ISIS may be, we cannot, there's an old Creole saying, Le bab kamawadu puidi fe wuze sao. When your neighbor's beard catches on fire, wet your own. So we need to be mindful of those things and not allow inequity to reach the levels of desperation and the intensity of exclusion that can lead to those phenomena. On the point of regenerative societies, we're talking food security. Imagine it's been, 30, 40 years since Eric Williams spoke about the necessity of a Caribbean food sustainability plan. And where are we on that? $480 million food imports in the OECS every year. We are all now net food importing countries. Equitable, healthy lifestyles, and again, regenerative societies is not, we have a tendency to look at the problem and equate problem equals solution. So we very narrow-mindedly focus on the problem and what is required, the injection required to solve that problem, and not look at the thing in a more holistic way. It's not enough to say no to drugs. It's not enough to say, no to sexual promiscuity, to this, that, and the other. Let us talk instead of healthy lifestyles. And healthy lifestyles means it's not what you're not doing, but what you should be doing in order to have a productive lifestyle. Equitable opportunity, safe, caring communities, and ecological balance. And the ecological balancing is really critical because in a way, it also touches on the question of spirituality, whatever your conception of God may be. because the Native Americans have this conception of the earth as being our mother, and everything has to be in balance with the earth. We are out of balance now in our societies, and we need to restore that balance. Participatory democracy is about citizenship rights, but one of the problems with us in the Caribbean, we all know our rights, even though they may not be fully exercised, but we do not accept or recognize our responsibilities. So rights and responsibilities have to be balanced, and then associated with that is the issue of both social and political accountability. I've often said to people who talk about political will that there is something called administrative will. There is individual will, right? Let us not be just, and I'm no apologist for the politicians, but do not be blaming politicians when we ourselves are failing to address the issues of accountability that we ought to be doing. So the UNESCO, almost 30 years ago now, did the Dolores report, which spoke about education simultaneously providing maps of a complex world in constant turmoil and a compass that will enable people to find their way in it. And that is the basic case for the need to reinvent education at this point in time. If we put education in Caribbean historical context, at every stage of our social development, there has been a corresponding requirement and architecture for education. So in the post-emancipation period, primary education was seen as what was necessary to help mentally emancipate the masses and build capacity. As we move towards the production economy, primary education became increasingly important. As we move towards a service economy, universal secondary education became the necessary educational underpinning to accomplish this. As we move into the knowledge economy, it is tertiary education that will take us there. So UNESCO, with their pillars of learning, started with 4 pillars of learning, and now they're down to 5. They've increased it to 5. Spoke about learning to know, learning to do, learning to live together, learning to be, and learning to transform oneself and society. Now, these may sound like just broad, fluffy, philosophical things, but they do translate into very practical and methodological issues that need to be addressed in education, which incidentally, though we may rhetorically subscribe to that philosophy, we are not, in fact, implementing those things in our education systems. So when we talk about learning to know, it's about having a solid competency base in literacy, numeracy, and scientific understanding. It's about comprehension. It's about the ability to think critically, research, and analyze. That is part of what the challenge of knowing is about. And that's why I have problems when people talk about the need to compartmentalize things. We have this tendency for every problem we experience, and I face that particularly in my former role in CXC. Demands from government, let's create a subject. I had a long argument with a particular prime minister. He wants to create a subject called critical thinking. I'm like, Prime Minister, with all due respect, there's no such thing called critical thinking as a subject. Incidentally, Finland, have you heard, has abolished subjects the last 2 weeks. They've abolished subjects. Mathematics, well taught, is critical thinking. English literature is literary analysis, is critical thinking. Foreign languages, properly understood and spoken, is critical thinking. Every subject has the capacity for those things. When we talk about learning to do, equally, skills, the capacity to act. It's not about, we have, I believe, a very false notion too, and that has been part of my battle educationally in the Caribbean, about a thrust to what I see as TVETizing our education system. Now that falls back squarely into a 19th century ideology that if you cannot do anything with your head, we teach you to use your hands. The divide between the head and the hand in the 21st century has been completely eroded. There is no high-end technical skills that do not require critical thinking, design thinking, and all of that, some cognitive capacity. So, let's get away from these old dichotomies. And these things are so deeply embedded in the DNA of education in the Caribbean, that is why we continue to fail. And, you can't blame our students. The problem, as I have said repeatedly, is not student performance or teacher capacity. Sad to say, it is ministries of education and the incoherence of policy that is bringing us to where we are. So in learning to live together, communications, conflict resolution, cultural sensitivity, multilingualism, this is a multiplex world, as we heard earlier this week. We need to be able to communicate across the world. In fact, I saw on Facebook on Rosetta Stone's Facebook page, a very interesting infographic. They were showing the 10 most used languages in the world. And guess what? English is probably like number 6 or something, if I recall correctly. Mandarin, 2 or 3 Indian languages. Some of them I had never heard of before. So, you know, we are really living in a fool's paradise because we are English speaking, and we think that it's sufficient to just operate in that English world. Noted. So the other things speak for themselves. But to move on, related to this is the CARICOM the statement of the ideal Caribbean person, which again was promulgated about 15 years or so ago, and which, you know, was promulgated but has not been actually absorbed in the bloodstream of education. The ideal Caribbean person speaks to producing somebody who is gender sensitive, environmentally aware, environmentally sensitive, historically aware, culturally rooted, etc., etc., etc. All of these things have profound implications, not just as a standalone philosophy of education, but as a guide to action, the things that we need to do to make education produce that type of person. So essentially, I'm saying we need to go back to basics. Let's not get lost into, you know, all the highfalutin things. TVET is not the answer by itself. ICT is not the answer by itself. We need to get back to basics and start with the fundamental. What is the purpose of education in the Caribbean? A lot of given our current economic environment, everybody thinks it's about jobs. Education is not meant to produce workers. Education is meant to produce people. And, you know, as far back as 1902, W.E. Du Bois said that the ideals of education, whether men are taught to teach or to plow, etc. I can't read it, but I'm sure you can. But in other words, he's saying we are dealing with souls and not with dollars. It's not just a dollar thing. It's not just an economy thing. So the philosophy is important because purpose determines structure, content, and method, and that's how we need to rethink and redesign our education system. And the purpose is also contextual. Is our education in the Caribbean still a 19th century construct or something for the 21st century? And what then should be the character of 21st century education? Let us stop thinking of education as early childhood, primary, secondary, and think of education as a continuum from cradle to grave. The redefining of human resource development in today's Caribbean. We need to see human resource development as a coherent, integrated framework, right, that involves both state and non-state actors, creating those synergies, but around a vision of human possibility in the Caribbean. So not jobs, not just attitudinal things, it's human possibility. Education, human resource development for the actualization of possibility. And that involves several intelligences, as we see in this slide.